In this talk, I want to discuss the question of who Dracula is, and the answer is pretty complex because he is many different things. I plan on talking about 5 things. Number 1, there are conflicting reports in the novel of different origins for Dracula, and they all contradict each other. We know from Stoker's notes that he lost track of what he had written, and so part of the reason for this paradox or conundrum of having 3 different origins for Dracula is because of bad writing. But in actual fact, also symbolically, I think it works in our favor. So rather than dismiss the 3 different conflicting points of origin as a factor of bad writing, I deliberately preferring to take that as a given and to work with it symbolically. Secondly, Dracula is a doppelganger, a double. And thirdly, as I mentioned in lecture last week, he does represent the unconscious in most of the characters. Fourth, for men, he is the anima, the repressed feminine side, and for women, he is the animus, the repressed masculine side. And also, he is a shape changer. So we'll work through these different meanings, and I'll show you where the passages are in the text. So I want to begin in chapter 3, and there is a quote. I'll find this right away. It's midnight. The midnight entry, chapter 3, Jonathan Harker's journal continued. He says, "We the Sekules have a right to be proud for," so he's identifying him with this particular ethnic group that descended from the Huns, Attila the Hun. For in our veins flows the blood of many brave races who fought as the lion fights for lordship. Here in the whirlpool of European races," and it's a great metaphor because he's talking about how Europe is a kind of petri dish, if you will, or melting pot for many different races. The Ugric tribe bore down from Iceland the fighting spirit which Thor and Woden gave them. So those are Norse deities. And this is interesting, the berserkers. You might know this term from an expression, to go berserk, which means to go wild. They were, in other legends, they are the source of werewolves, actually, but they were Norse warriors who were human most of the time, except when they went into battle. And they transformed into wolves. And the only thing remained human about them when they went into battle was their eyes. I have here somewhere a brief definition. Yes, berserkers normally appear as human beings that are no stronger than ordinary men, but in battle, their eyes are human. They go into savage frenzy, howling and barking, foaming at the mouth, and are invulnerable to fire or steel. They sweep their enemies before them. Berserkers are frequently cited as sources for werewolf lore. Stoker is fond of the name and gives it to the wolf in the London Zoo, actually. So, that first source of origin is this idea that they come from these various races. And down here, here too, which is his connection to the Huns, and to Attila the Hun. And he's actually, the word is right there somewhere. Anyways, it's here. Take my word for it. No, I gotta find it. I gotta find it now, just to show you it's there. Here, what devil or witch was ever so great as Attila, whose blood is in these veins? And so the first point of origin for Dracula, he is a descendant of Attila the Hun. The second source, origin for Dracula, is in chapter 18, and it's a discussion of the school, the Scholomance, 291. So it's in a journal entry, chapter 18, the entry, Mina Harker's journal, the 30th of September. It's about 3 or 4 pages in. And Van Helsing calls him thus we find the habitation of, and this is Van Helsing's name for Dracula, this man that was. Now, that's a really interesting epithet to call Dracula because it's loaded with all kinds of interesting ambiguities. The idea that, first off, Dracula is genderqueer, meaning that he is both a man and not a man at the same time. But also, Van Helsing connects him to this this school in the mountains for witchcraft and so on, supernatural dealings with the devil, and it's called the Scholomance, right here. So that students are sent to the Draculas, he says, were, as Arminius, the great noble race through, though now and again were Seons who were held co-evils, who have had dwellings with the evil one. They lived with Satan. They learned their secrets in the Scholomance among the mountains, where the devil claims every 10th scholar as his due. So this is a secret. It so reminds me of Harry Potter, unfortunately. But anyway, it's a magic school in the mountains, and the devil gives people secret powers there if you go to this particular school, and he claims every 10th student for his own. And so the implication being that when Dracula was sent there to study, that he was actually taken by Satan, and became a vampire here, as it says. So that's the second origin, is that he had this this Faustian moment, I guess, where he learned everything that could be learned about human and divine knowledge. And the third is in chapter 24. It's a very interesting explanation for Dracula's origin that is natural. So let me see if I can find this for you. So what did I say this was? Chapter 24. It's the journal entry, Harker's entry, or sorry, Mina's entry, October 5th, 5 p.m. And it's about 3 or 4 pages in. And yes, it is necessary for your sake in the first, and then for the sake of humanity. This monster has done much harm already. Okay, so we know that. And here is Van Helsing's explanation for how Dracula came into existence. The very place where he have been alive, undead for all these centuries, is full of strangeness of geologic and chemical world. Now, the grammar is bad here because Van Helsing's English is not his first language, but he's talking about an odd geophysical place in the earth that is weird in terms of its geology and chemistry. There are deep caverns and fissures that reach none know whither. There have been volcanoes, some of whose openings still send out waters of strange properties and gases that kill or make to vivify, that is to say, to bring back life. Doubtless, There is something magnetic or electric in some of these combinations of occult forces which work for physical life in a strange way. This should start to sound like Dr. Frankenstein to you a little bit. But that there's this particular fissure in the earth where all of these weird, and occult here simply means hidden or unknown. It doesn't necessarily mean magical. And Van Helsing here is speaking as a scientist, not as a mystic. But that all these things came together, and in himself were from the first of some great qualities. In a hard and warlike time, he was celebrated that he have more iron nerve, more subtle brain, more braver heart than any man. And so this nature of Dracula comes out of this geophysical oddity. So how can he be all of these things at the same time? And as I say, it's partly Stoker's not being able to keep track of things, but it creates a kind of mystical origin for Dracula that is impenetrable. And in a sense, because he represents the unconscious, or if you think about it in terms of the Johari window, the bottom right-hand corner of that matrix where I don't know and you don't know, because he represents the unknown, he has many different places of origin. The point is that he is essentially unknowable, and that's how I'm choosing to interpret these conflicting accounts of Dracula's origin. Dracula is also a doppelganger, a double, a physical double for some of the characters. The first one is in chapter 4. It's a little odd, but I want to draw your attention to it. Yeah, 64. So this is a journal entry the 25th of June in the morning. And right after that, there's another entry, same day later. And it begins with Harker saying that in his traditional empirical way, he must record everything. So let me find this passage. Same day later, I've made the effort, and God helping me, have come safely back to this room. I must put down every detail in order. This again is his fetish with empirical detail. And he says, I went whilst my courage was fresh, straight to the window on the south side, and at once got outside the narrow ledge of stone which runs around the building on this side. The stones are big and roughly cut. The mortar has by process of time been washed away. Took off my boots and ventured out on the desperate way. I looked down once so as to make sure that a sudden glimpse of the awful depth would not overcome me. So he's worried about being dizzy and falling, but after kept my eyes away from it. I knew pretty well the direction and distance of the Count's window, so he's trying to make his way to the Count's room from outside of the castle walls, and made for it as well as I could, having regard to the opportunities available. I did not feel dizzy. I suppose I was too excited, and the time seemed ridiculously short till I found myself standing on the windowsill and trying to raise up the sash. So he is agitated and excited to break into the Count's room. Of course, he finds the room empty. And it's interesting that he looked for the key, but it was not in the lock, and he could not find it anywhere, suggesting that the mystery of Dracula is something that he really cannot get to the bottom of. Yeah, so he finds Dracula's room, and he says here, Goes into this room. At the bottom there's a dark tunnel-like passage through which came a deathly, sickly odor, the odor of old earth and newly turned. So there's this very suggestive entering the cave. Freudians say it's vaginal. It's a return to the uterus or the womb. It's a descent into the feminine. Those are all possible readings. I'm not saying you have to buy into them, but that's generally how it's made out to be. All right. Lastly, I want to show you this weird little moment here. Hopefully I can find it. All right, this is, chapter 4. This is such a bizarre moment. 29th of June. Today is the date of my last letter, and the Count has taken steps to prove that it was genuine. For again I saw him leave the castle by the same window and in my clothes. So what's happening is that Dracula is dressing up as Harker and leaving the castle and going out into the world dressed as Harker. This is symbolically, to say the least, very disturbing. It means that, or suggests that, Dracula is becoming Harker, or part of Harker, or if you want to read it the other way around, that Harker's unconscious mind is now becoming increasingly conscious and moving up to that top left-hand corner of the Jahari window. I will also show you some passages in other discussions where it's clear that Dracula is the anima, the feminine side for the men, and the masculine side for the women. I'm pretty sure I can find you this passage very quickly also, another very disturbing passage. Well, I can't find it. There's a passage where Dracula is blowing kisses to Harker, and I will try and find that and put it up, but you might be able to find it by searching. Anyways, it's a memorable scene because it shows that Dracula is feminized, or can be feminine, and also shows that he has a fully erotic physical homoerotic physical relationship with Harker. So Dracula is all of these things, and he is a mystery that remains impenetrable, I think, for very obvious reasons, because he's clearly so much a part of the unconscious mind.